Good afternoon. This is Kathy Ritzman with NPCA, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Getting the Most Out of Your Employees with Performance Management. Upon joining the webinar, you will need to choose your audio preference. You're able to listen to the presentation through your computer speakers, or you can join the webinar by phone by dialing the number listed on the screen using the access code and audio PIN number provided. We encourage you to have a copy of the presentation that was emailed to you so you can follow along and take notes. We have muted all participants to eliminate background noise since we will be recording this webinar. We would also like to know how many people at your location are participating today. If you could please use the question and answer section to let us know that information, we'd appreciate it. If you do have a question you would like to ask the presenter, please use the question and answer function to type your question or comment. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation. We will hold those questions until the end of the presentation for answering. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Jamie Hasty. Jamie Hasty is a Vice President with Fesco Management Consultants in Bristol, Tennessee and Richmond, Virginia. She graduated from East Tennessee State University with a degree in Human Resources Management. Jamie is a generalist consultant in all areas of human resource management with specialties in affirmative action, policy development, wage and hour accounting, employment regulation compliance, training and development, compensation and performance management systems, employee satisfaction assessments, executive screening and placement, and general human resources consulting. She regularly conducts management training programs for clients and serves as a guest speaker for state and national associations and chambers of commerce. Jamie is also a certified trainer for Vital Learning Corporation and Fesco Leadership Institute. I will now pass the controls over to Jamie to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for the next hour to talk about performance management and how we get the most out of our individuals. As Kathy said, we will be doing questions at the end of our time today, so roughly probably about 10 to 15 minutes before 1 p.m. So that gives us roughly 45 minutes to cover the content. Feel free to submit your questions ahead of time, of course, via the chat function, and we'll get to those as we near the end of our session. So I want to talk about performance management and really what we need to be doing from a management perspective, from supervisors, from HR. I know there are some groups where they may be smaller organizations that don't have a truly designated HR function. So performance management and documentation really falls heavily on the manager. And then we have other organizations that may be a little bit larger that do, in fact, have an HR individual, but yet still rely on management to keep track of things and notify them of things so that we can ensure the best protection for the organization. When I think about performance management, practically everyone complains about managing that performance of their employees. Employees don't like performance appraisals because they typically feel powerless in the process, but they also feel like they're getting a quote-unquote report card, which may be based on arbitrary or confusing or biased factors. And supervisors dislike performance appraisals because they know that they have to be forced to make decisions about an employee's performance. And then, after communicating sometimes difficult news, they have to face him or her every day thereafter. So why do we bother with performance management if neither the employee nor the supervisor like the process? It's because performance management really does establish a method of how we manage work groups, and it allows us to set clear expectations with measurable standards with all employees as it relates to their job responsibilities. It also allows us to support and provide ongoing monitoring, coaching, and feedback to those employees regarding their performance. If you're not doing formal evaluations, I really encourage you to do so because they really are based on the extent to which the employee meets our specified expectations. This is how we justify our business decisions, our employment decisions, whether they are promoted, whether they're demoted, terminated, and it really does give us the backing to support those decisions. So Managers also use the results of this process to really make decisions, as I mentioned, with selection, placement, training, compensation, so on and so forth. So, when we talk about who is responsible for managing performance, ultimately that responsibility lies on the managers in each department. They have to be on top of it. They have to be doing coaching, counseling, documenting any sort of disciplinary action, or making notes throughout the year so that they, when it comes time to do our performance evaluation, that they have a nice recognition of the last 12 months. So with that being said, performance management for me and what we like to focus on really hits three key areas for us. First and foremost, there's your planning. And that truly starts from the date in which they're hired. We set our expectations up front and what our measurements are going to be so that when we do have to coach them or counsel them or discipline them, we don't have to reiterate and go back to square one because we didn't set those expectations up front. Then, of course, we have the managing piece of performance management. That's our employee development. And then thirdly, our evaluating when we review their performance. And the common misconception out there is that, evaluations are really an annual type thing, and that is true. But if we're doing what we should be doing as managers, as supervisors, as owners of businesses, there should be ongoing feedback throughout the entire year. It should never just be, we're going to talk about your performance at your annual review or your 6-month review. We want to make sure that it's an ongoing cycle. So the purpose of performance management, it really does allow us to use established standards for performance for each job and evaluate that performance against, like I said, our expectations. The process, as I mentioned, does involve planning, developing, and evaluating specific job-related performance. And then our final outcome, of course, is that formal evaluation. There are at least 4 categories that I think are truly important as it relates to performance management. And the first one is it allows us to recognize past performance and to improve future performance. When we talk about performance appraisals, they're used as a time for praise, but also as a time for plans for improvement. It allows me as the manager and the employee to sit together and look at what I've done well, where I can improve, and to really set some good goals for desired levels of future performance. And we'll talk about setting SMART goals here in just a few minutes. Secondly, it allows us to support a fair and equitable compensation system. Well-managed organizations tie compensation directly to performance. And if we have an accurate performance appraisal system, it allows the performance to be measured against goals to ensure that we're compensating those folks fairly. As I've mentioned probably in some of our past sessions, whether it be at the annual convention and throughout, compensation truly is your #1 controllable cost. So we want to make sure that we really are managing performance fairly and appropriately to contain some of those costs. We don't want to give an across-the-board 3 or 4% cost of living adjustment and possibly risk compensating some underperformers. On the flip side, while we may be compensating some of our I call them our superstars, that may be demotivating to them because they sit back and review their last 12 months and say, I did a really extraordinary job. And comparing that to some of my other coworkers that didn't do as well as I did, we're getting the same compensation. So we want to make sure that it's fair and equitable. Thirdly, we want to give frank and constructive feedback to employees because quite frankly, employees want to know how they've done in the past and how they're doing now. Whether or not they admit that, everybody needs to know kind of where they stand, and they want to hear ways that they can improve on their future performance. And lastly, we want to create a record of past performance. Not only does documentation serve to protect us in a variety of things, so does the performance appraisal. It really is a written record of performance problems or performance successes, and it provides us with a legitimate basis for making performance or personnel decisions. If we have to, unfortunately, let somebody go from their position, the first question I'm going to ask you, if you were to call me up just to kind of get some advice on this termination, is tell me what the last performance appraisal says, because I want to make sure that it's accurate and reflective of the feedback that you are giving me about your frustrations about this employee. So it allows us to give proof that we were justified in terminating that employee for poor performance. Or, heaven forbid, we have to defend an EEOC charge that was on the basis of something other than performance, but in fact we did terminate them for performance. We have that documentation trail to show that. Same thing with unemployment. If we want to challenge unemployment, your performance appraisals, your disciplinary actions are key in winning those type scenarios. There are a few benefits that I want to look at as it relates to performance management, and the first one is the follower. So that would be the employee. So if conducted properly, performance management really can provide several benefits to the employees. It allows them to look at clearly defined goals and expectations, so myself as the supervisor and the employer are on the same page. It also allows us to identify the importance of the employee's contribution to the success of the department and to the company. All too often, employees get so siloed into their position only and forget how their performance or lack thereof really does have a trickle-down effect to other departments or other employees or whatnot. So we want to ensure that they understand that. They want to have a good understanding of performance and compensation. So if I score, a 4.5 out of 5 on my performance evaluation, well, how is that tied to compensation? Does that mean I get a higher increase in my hourly rate or salary rate, or is it a lesser value? So they want to see how good performance is tied back to the ultimate motivating factor, which is money. They also want to look at a clear understanding of how to improve. I can't hold my employees accountable for meeting certain expectations and standards if, one, we haven't discussed what my expectations and standards are, but two, I haven't given them any feedback or clear definition on how they can improve, whether it's education, technical training, slowing down processes to think things through a little bit more. We have to be clear on how those folks can improve. They also want a clear understanding of their current performance of how am I doing? What do I do well, and what can I improve upon? Most importantly, the consequence of poor performance. This is why documentation is so vital, because it's one thing to go through, disciplinary action or performance appraisals and have those honest and constructive conversations of, Sally or Johnny, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. We really need you to improve. That's great. But if we don't tie that back to if you fail to improve, or if you don't improve by this date or by this time or by this percentage, whatever your measurement may be, they need to understand what the consequence of the next steps are going to be, whether that be a second written warning, whether that be termination, suspension with or without pay. They need to understand that. And an additional comment to that would be, in dealing with a lot of unemployment cases, this seems to be a topic that comes up quite often during the hearings of, well, Ms. Hasty, did you have a conversation with the employee that if they failed to improve, what would be the next step? So make sure that they really understand the consequences of their poor performance and what those next steps may be. And lastly, performance management truly does build confidence and trust that the employee has in you as their supervisor. It builds communication, it builds relationship, and it does build that trust that, hey, I may not like what he or she may be saying, but at least it's honest, and it's feedback, and it's to help me grow and develop. So those are some benefits to the follower. To the leader, whether that be as the manager or to the organization, again, it supports our documentation and practices for defending against discrimination claims, unemployment claims, wrongful termination lawsuits. So it's really important to have that paper trail. Secondly, it does help with satisfied and motivated employees. There are studies that show that, of course, employees that get ongoing feedback, ongoing constructive feedback, rather, tend to be highly motivated and more satisfied than those employees in organizations where their manager only speaks to them at the time of the annual evaluation, and that's only when they find out how they were doing. So we want to make sure that we've got satisfied, happy, and motivated employees. It also allows us to have more productive and committed employees. If I know what I'm doing wrong and I'm able to fix it, it of course increases my productivity. And if I'm increasing my productivity and I'm a little bit more motivated and tend to be satisfied, I'm more apt to be committed to you not only as a manager but to the organization. I talk a lot in my leadership sessions and my performance management sessions about compliance versus commitment. We don't want employees just to comply with our expectations and our standards. We truly want to keep them motivated, get them engaged and happy to where they're committed. They're our superstars. If we need them to stay late, they're the first person raising their hand, willing and offering to stay late. They're committed not only to you, but to the organization, and will stand by you all. So we want to make sure that we move out of that compliance piece and into that commitment piece. And it also allows us to enhance our employee and employer relations. Having good culture, good communications is truly important to the overall success of the organization. With all of these benefits in mind, it truly is obvious that performance management can be a win-win situation if it's properly implemented and followed. And we do that, again, by first starting with performance planning. Okay. So when we look at keys to successful performance planning, we want to positively impact the performance of your respective department or company and really begin to evaluate the employee's performance. They need to understand what the job is, how it fits into the organization, and what their specific responsibilities are. But additionally, the supervisor needs to do two things. First and foremost, the supervisor needs to assume responsibility for the performance of their work group. As a manager, I am only as successful as the group that is working beneath me to get the daily tasks accomplished. I also, as a manager, need to set and communicate standards that are challenging but reachable. Okay, and reachable is the key there. And then I have to monitor each employee's performance against those standards. It's one thing to set performance expectations and standards, but it's another to set them too high to where we know they are not attainable. That sets the employee up for failure ultimately, and can be extremely demotivating to not only that employee but to the rest of the group if they see that. So keys that are really will improve performance appraisal process really are, first and foremost, describing the job and the importance that it has to the organization. As a manager, I need to be able to explain the key responsibilities of the job and how hitting these goals, these accomplishments, the responsibilities impact the overall organization. We have to help them see the big picture and not just the small part. Explain how the results really do impact the success of the company. If they have excessive scrap or, they've got low productivity or whatever, they need to understand that, that affects shipping, that affects accounts payables, receivables, those type of things. Make them see the big picture. We also want to establish clear performance expectations with measurement criteria, okay? And they often come in terms of standards of the job. So typically, most of us have job descriptions. They may be basic, they may be very complex. It typically varies from organization to organization, but you want to focus on the essential duties of the positions and the standards that you all have set for that job. Okay, those can include both what I call tangible and intangible standards. So when I talk about tangible standards, they are clear, concrete, specific, and measurable. So, for example, a number of items produced, shipped, received, deadlines, project completion dates, etc. Intangible standards really are those that are specifically related to our human characteristics, such as attitude, my morale, my ethics, and my cooperation with the rest of the team. Ultimately, most people want to do their job well, but it's really hard to do that unless our employees have a clear expectation and understanding of what we are asking them to do. So a standard or expectation really should be specific and clear enough so that we let the employee know what is expected, but should also allow the employee room to kind of look for new improved ways of doing things. You know, the nice thing about having all of these different generations in the workplace now is that we've got new and creative ways of thinking and doing things. So tap into that talent as well. So when you are looking at establishing clear performance expectations, use your job descriptions, use the organizational goals, department goals, but also look at past performance if they've been with us for a little bit. Thirdly, you want to communicate expectations to employees. So on the job, there's a level of performance that, of course, is expected, but that can change at any time, given our workload, our client expectations, vendor expectations. And typically, the older, well-valued employees really need expectations restated. And when I say older, I mean long-term, not in age, because all too often, you know, if I've been with a company for a while, I get into this cycle and this habit of doing things the way that I've always been doing them. So, you know, everybody needs performance management, new employees, long-term employees, and sometimes we have to restate that for our longer-term employees just to kind of revamp and re-engage them. So managers and supervisors, here are a few things that I think clearly need to be communicated in terms of expectations for your staff. Why the task must be completed, when the work has to be done, how rigid our deadline is. Another good example would be how the finished work will be measured or evaluated. How important is the task in relation to the other work that we're doing. And how the task fits into the big picture of the organization. Okay, so it's really important for us to take time with the employee to ensure that, you know, all 6 steps have been completed. We've clearly conveyed expectations, and that we've ensured that we're all on the same page. Okay, after they have been communicated, those expectations when we set them, I always like to ask for feedback from the employee and help them, you know, kind of develop a tracking and a follow-up plan, especially if it's something new. If we've got, you know, a new order, a new vendor, or what have you, or, you know, a new big project, and we're changing some of the expectations up, engage that employee in developing a work plan or an expectation plan and some deadlines. Because a lot of times, if I give them a say-so or you know, a part in the development process, they tend to buy in a little bit more and stick with it than me as the manager just saying, okay, this is what you're going to do. Number 4, we want to identify skills and resources needed to be successful in the job. Discuss with your employees the skills, the resources required for them to successfully accomplish their job. And if they're experienced, and as most of them are, you know, what do they think that they'll need to get the job done? And make sure that there's an understanding and commitment from both of you all. The employee is committed to meeting these expectations, but you as the manager is committed to helping them meet those. Next, you want to set priorities. Making sure that all of our tasks are done. You may have to rank them in order in terms of importance. Key objectives may, you know, be taken into consideration there. And you know, if for whatever reason priorities change, make sure that, you know, we're communicating that back to the employee so that they can adjust as well. And lastly, you want to review and check for understanding commitment. Again, it really is critical for both of your success, the employee and the supervisor, that the employee understands what is being asked of him or her, and that they're committed to accomplishing it. Listen effectively to hear and understand what they're saying and go from there. You know, I think good performance planning really does require more than simply just telling the employee, this is what I expect from you. It takes forethought, it takes planning, and it does take commitment, which in turn is time, I understand. But if we do it up front and we have a good system in place, it really does make your life as a manager, as a business owner, so much easier if we can set everything up front. So that does cover some of the keys to successful performance planning. Next thing I want to cover setting expectations. As I mentioned, you want to generally involve minimum standards of acceptable performance, and I did talk about tangible and intangible standards. So, you know, I really want, whether it be in a job description, whether it be in a correction meeting or a performance evaluation, make sure you're setting those standards. If I have a new project I'm working on, be clear, concrete, and specific, and give me something that is measurable. Okay, I meet X amount of, you know, client orders by this date. Okay, or I've increased productivity by 30%. Make sure that's tangible. The second piece of that is, of course, the intangible, our human characteristics. Cooperation, work ethic, attitude, morale. You know, those are just as important as hitting the goal. Okay, so think about how you can tie both of those tangible and intangibles into setting your expectations. With performance management does come, you know, barriers, of course, to performance measurements. And that can be both on the employee or the supervisor level. And some of them include thinking the job can't be measured. Any duty and responsibility in the organization typically can be measured. You just have to put your mind to it and figure out how you're going to measure it. If the measurements are too hard to work with, that can be demotivating or frustrating to you as a supervisor or the employee. If the measurement is viewed as a punishment, that's also a barrier. If you don't give me enough time to measure my success, or the supervisor feels like there's not enough time to measure the success, that can essentially hinder the process. If neither one of you care about the process, that's also a problem. And if not met, you know, barriers, typically supervisors feel like it may make us look bad. You know, here I have set this expectation for an employee. They didn't make it. Well, it's bad on them, but as a supervisor, did I not manage it correctly? And that may be the case. You know, performance management needs to be accountable not only for the employee, but what the supervisor's role in that management is. You know, again, I'm only as successful as the people I have below me. So if I'm not taking an active role and setting clear expectations and performance measurements and staying on top of it, I'm setting them up for failure as well as myself. So be mindful of barriers to effective performance management. There are some types of measurements that you all can look at. And the first one is quality. Of course, that's extremely important in the line of work that you all are doing, as well as quantity. The timeliness that it takes for us to complete the tasks or the projects, the cost involved, improvement, and goal achievement. Use those types of measurements in our performance management. So quality is a good measurement. First and foremost, understandable and representative of the job. All of our employees in our department need to know where we are going and what it takes to get there. I really encourage you not to jump too far off topic, but strategic planning is really important, not only on an organizational level, but also on a departmental level. And engaging those employees in the strategic plan, or at least our 5-year 1-year, 3-year, 5-year plan, whatever it may be. They need to see that big picture. So make sure that you're sharing that with them. Again, the measurements need to be specific and reliable. It needs to focus on our results, and they need to be consistent for the job, not the person. All too often, we get in a habit of relying heavily on, again, what I call our superstars, because they're dedicated, they're good performers, that go above and beyond. So we sometimes as managers give them lesser performance expectations or measurements because I know that I can count on them. And then for the others, I make them a little bit harder. But they may be doing the same job. So make sure that, you know, within reason, that they're consistent for the job and not for the person. We're not fluctuating things too much one way or the other for each person. The measurements need to be helpful. They need to help us promote growth. They don't need to hinder the growth. They need to, you know, help us grow and develop personally and professionally. They have to be useful. It has to make things better for the company and for that department. And again, it has to be achievable. Don't set the bar so high that I know for a fact up front, and you know as well, that I'm not going to meet it, because it's demotivating, it's frustrating, and I'm less apt to take on a new skill set or take on a new project outside of the scope of my ability because I failed the last time, because you set it too high. So make sure it's achievable, okay? So steps in the planning meeting. I really want us to focus on, one, you as the manager prepare for the meeting up front, whether this is when they're hired or whether this is for the annual evaluation or we're just touching base. I want you to prep by pulling the job description, reviewing that, making sure it's still up to date. If you all have job descriptions in place, I really do encourage you to challenge them on an annual basis and make sure that they don't need to be updated or tweaked, because all too often jobs do change or they morph, or we, you know, kind of merge two jobs together. So make sure it's representative. You also want to look at some of the goals that we may have established in the past, if they're a longer-term employee, as well as past performance evaluations. Jointly review previous development areas. This is where performance evaluations get interesting, because a lot of times, myself included, I'm guilty of this. We get through a performance evaluation or a performance meeting for disciplinary or tweaking, you know, a behavior or whatever it may be, and we set goals or we set a new standard, and we agree to a time frame and we agree to follow up, but then life and work gets in the way and we get too busy, and guess what? We drop the ball. Okay, so we haven't followed up. We don't know whether or not we actually met that goal or whatnot. So be mindful of that, especially in step 2 of reviewing previous development areas. You know, if I, as the manager, drop the ball on that, maybe we need to put that in our additional performance plan for this year, for this, you know, time frame. But don't necessarily hold me fully accountable for that if you were supposed to come to me as the employee and check in as well. Step 3, jointly agree on the areas to be targeted for development. I really think it's important for the employee to conduct self-evaluations, as well as the manager doing the evaluation, and then comparing where the two meet, and talking through if there are similarities or differences, or discrepancies rather, in the rating system. Develop that performance plan with specific measurements, and then an implementation schedule. So that's kind of how, you know, a 60 or 90-day evaluation, annual evaluation, that should be kind of our process and planning for the meeting. I really encourage you to try to do as much of that, the prepping and the planning, ahead of time. My biggest pet peeve is when managers come in to talk about performance or for an annual evaluation or what have you, and they don't have their act together. I haven't reviewed things. I haven't completed the documentation or what have you. That, you know, negates some of that trust and confidence that the employee has in the supervisor, to make sure that we're doing that. When we look at goal setting, It really is truly a powerful process for thinking about the future and for motivating yourself as a supervisor, but as well as your staff, into the future reality. And it helps us choose where we want to go in life, whether that be with a company or on a personal level. I also like goal setting a lot for career pathing. So I may hire in somebody right out of high school or right out of college that doesn't have a whole lot of experience, and they are a frontline worker, and they're starting at one of our lower wage rates. Setting goals and having them develop personally and professionally show me as the employee where I can move throughout the company. Can I move up in the next year or 2 years? Can I move over? Can I obtain this new skill set and jump over to a different department? Or jump into sales or contract bidding or whatever it may be. Really have good goal settings and focus on that. So the start to setting personal goals or professional goals is what I call SMART goals. They first and foremost have to be specific, focused on the task at hand. They have to be, again, measurable. They have to be attainable. They have to be relevant to the work that I'm doing or the work that I may be doing. And lastly, they have to be time-bound. Don't give me an unopen or an open-ended goal that has no accountability to it. Because what happens is we just keep pushing it off and off and off. You also want to stay on course, have constant feedback on touching base, what have you, and then achieving those goals. Once we achieve them, are we going to celebrate? And let's identify other goals to tap into after I've achieved certain goals, the first ones that we developed. So use the SMART goals in dealing with job descriptions or performance evaluations or disciplinary issues. So that is planning performance. The second piece that I want to look at is, of course, managing performance. And that involves mentoring and coaching and really kind of getting the employee on the same page with you. So when I think about a mentor, it's, in my mind, a little bit different from a coach. So a mentor to me is really an advisor and a friend who really kind of takes somebody underneath their wing, for lack of a better phrase, and guides them through questioning and listening rather than telling. It really is somebody that kind of looks out for this individual, that shares their knowledge, their experience, and it's more of a relationship. The mentor is, and a cooperative relationship, two-way versus, here I am, your supervisor, and this is what I'm telling you to do or asking you to do. So I really think it's important for every employee in the company to have a mentor or somebody that they can, look up to, whether that's, their supervisor or somebody else in the company. Again, studies have shown that employees that have mentors in organizations tend to be much more motivated and committed to the company than they would be if they didn't have that mentorship there. So when I look at our mentoring model, it really is sharing my knowledge, my skill, my experience, but in a befriending way. You also have counseling, which is, a way that we kind of allow the person to discover their own answers to questions or challenges they may have on a daily basis by kind of, guiding them through that process, asking them questions. And then coaching, to me, of course, is the process of guiding another person to increase their knowledge, skill, or goal achievement. And that's done a lot in behavioral modeling and just having good relationships with your staff. When I look at coaching, it really is a process of identifying and correcting that performance issue before it becomes major problems. Coaching, in the grand scheme of things, should be the first step before I ever get to writing an employee up. It's ongoing development, and it really does involve working with that employee to identify the problems, correct the behavior, and I emphasize behavior, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute, or make minor adjustments to keep them on track with their performance expectations. Your effectiveness in this step really lies in your ability to problem solve. Okay, it involves defining the problem, what my potential solutions as in the employee may be, and developing action plans with the employees to implement the solution. And it involves a couple of areas, 4 areas really. First and foremost, support. You need to help me in developing the skill in a caring way. Okay. The second piece is feedback. You have to give me immediate feedback on how I am doing in developing the skill. My biggest pet peeve as a manager is, and also as HR, is really, a lot of times supervisors see things going on and we don't speak up and say something. We don't try to correct the behavior up front, and that's a challenge. So make sure you're doing it timely. You also have modeling. If you need to show them how to do the specific skill set, do that. And then, of course, our development, where skills are developed. And we do that through a number of ways. First and foremost, I call them our steps to coaching technique. First and foremost, agree that a problem exists. And that's the toughest part, and we'll cover that here in just a minute. But I do that by saying, Susie, Johnny, remember when you first started, or remember when we brought you on and we went through the job description and we had those clear expectations of you have to do 10 client orders by the end of the day, and you have to have less than 2% deficiency or 2% error or whatever it may be. But what you're doing now is 3 orders with 10% error. Do you see where the problem between what we've established as the expectation and what you're doing exists? Do you see the difference? And that's how you lay it out there for them. Then you mutually discuss and demonstrate the alternative. Again, if it can be demonstrated physically, do that. Or if it's something that you can just discuss and walk through step by step, do that as well. Mutually agree on the action to be taken to solve. And I really enjoy engaging the employee and finding their own solution in this process. Tell me, Johnny and Susie, how you plan on fixing this issue. Follow up to measure the results to make sure that things are getting better, and recognize the development when it occurs. All too often, again, we get busy because work gets in the way, life gets in the way, and we forget to kind of give that recognition when they fix the bad behavior. So make sure you're recognizing that. As I mentioned, getting agreement really is critical, but it's difficult to do at times. So again, if you're going to do it, establish a clear understanding in the difference between what the employee is doing versus what we expect them to do. And help them, again, understand the negative impact of the behavior. If they continue doing it this way, this is what's going to happen. Give specific examples of current or past behavior using facts about their performance. And it's important to note, I always manage based on fact versus opinion. A fact to me is neutral. It is what it is. You did it, you said it, you made it, what have you, versus my opinion about what's going on, which can either be positive or negative. So always focus on the facts of the situation and the behavior, not necessarily the attitude or the opinion that you as a supervisor have formulated around it. And then clarify your expectations in the area being discussed. Again, just to reiterate, some coach planning notes, agrees that the problem exists, mutually discuss and demonstrate that alternative, agree on an action to be taken to solve, and follow up and measure those results. Feedback is truly important as well, and we want to make sure that we give constructive feedback, because it really is important to respond to that employee's performance through positive comments. And I like this feedback quotation. Withholding constructive feedback is like sending people out on a long and complicated hike without a compass. If you set these expectations and then don't follow up with me throughout the year or throughout whatever time frame we've set up, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to navigate myself. I don't know whether I'm doing well, whether I'm doing poorly. So make sure that we're giving that feedback. If you're going to come back with a feedback meeting, whether it be formal or informal, just kind of first and foremost state the constructive purpose of your feedback. Hey, Johnny, just want to touch base, let you know how we're doing. Describe specifically what you observed. I saw you do this. I heard you say this. You know, your records or your performance or what have you is X, Y, and Z. Describe your reactions as a supervisor, whether you were surprised, whether you were shocked, whether you were disappointed, whether you're happy with where they're at. Give them your reactions to how they are doing. Also give them an opportunity to respond. You know, Johnny, Susie, tell me how you think you're doing. What can you do better? What do you think about what I've pointed out to you? Offer specific suggestions and allow them to do the same, and then summarize and express your support. Look, I know, we're going to have good days and bad days, but I really think you're on a good path, or I think, there are some things that we can tweak and get you back on track. But make sure that we summarize and express those supporting statements. You also want to develop a motivating environment, and that's by, good morale, motivation, good relationships with your staff. And if I have good morale, if generally my staff is happy, which I know is difficult to do sometimes as a manager, it comes from feedback and building that relationship and that trust. But that morale leads to motivation. So if I have a generally happy work group, typically we're going to have higher productivity, more commitment, so on and so forth. Okay. And that really is determined by a couple of areas. The attitude, first and foremost, that you as a manager have towards the company, towards them as employees, and towards the work. I really, really get discouraged when I hear supervisors or managers badmouth another department, badmouth the company because they're frustrated or what have you. That's extremely demotivating to employees, and that's not going to build commitment. That's going to have them step back and say, wait a minute here. If they're talking bad about another manager or the company, what do they say about me behind my back? Okay, so make sure we have a good attitude. Also, our commitment. As a manager, we want to be committed to the company, to good employee relations, and to doing good work. Walk the walk and talk the talk. You have to lead by example. If as a manager, I'm not willing to roll up my sleeves and get dirty, then I can't expect my employees to do the same. Okay, so do what you say and walk the walk and talk the talk. Poor morale motivation really is created by a number of items, but typically lack of caring, a lack of trust or recognition, or a lack of respect for my manager. If we don't have team players, that can be demotivating and create poor morale. If I'm pessimistic as a manager about things. So, again, do a check of yourself. Do a check of your department. See if these things are evident in the culture and actively work on improving them. Because we want to have optimistic, encouraging, interested cultures where we have good trust and we're fair in our standards and our compensation and the teamwork. So focus on that good morale and motivation. Okay. Positive recognition. Why do we recognize employees for doing what we've hired them and they're supposed to do? Because everybody needs recognition. I may be doing a great job, but I still want to hear that I'm doing a great job. So make sure that you're giving both constructive feedback, but also positive recognition, even when I'm doing what you're paying me to do. And a couple of tips to make that positive is personalize your recognition and make it sincere. Johnny, I saw you knock out this big order and you got it done early. I'm really, really happy. Thank you for being a team player. Enhance the quality, be specific, and lastly, be timely in that. Don't wait a couple weeks to give me feedback because it loses its teeth, for lack of a better phrase, in that performance feedback session. So make sure you're doing that. Specific, it's timely, and it's personalized. The last piece of this is, of course, evaluating performance. So we've covered, planning and coaching and managing. Now, again, steps in the performance management. Same thing like you would plan. You want to prep and plan for that annual meeting or for the evaluation or for the disciplinary meeting. Set a meeting date up front and make sure that you've given me ample time to gather my thoughts as the employee. Don't drop it on me and, at 9 o'clock in the morning say, oh, by the way, we're going to meet at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Okay? Try to be proactive and do it ahead of time. Make sure that you as the manager have pulled all of your data and your documentation up front. And if as the employee I need to do a self-evaluation or I need to, bring some things with me to our meetings, let me know as well. Okay? Step 2 is the review session. You want to open positively. Now, the key there is to not set them up for a false sense of hope. All too often, having these meetings sometimes is extremely uncomfortable. And if you're not comfortable in the process, it's very easy to kind of oversell or be overly positive. But be pleasant, be positive. Thanks for coming in. Here's what we're going to cover. We'll go through your review, or we'll go through, some areas that I think we need to discuss in terms of performance, and cover those constructively and matter-of-factly. But again, focusing on that fact and the behavior, not the attitude and the opinion. Ask the employee's opinion of what's going on and what their solutions are going to be. Of course, you want to discuss that performance and address concerns, and jointly develop a plan of action. A lot of times when I'm managing my staff, I tell them to, here's the areas of improvement. Why don't you take the rest of the day or get back to me by tomorrow afternoon and come up with a plan. Come back to me with what you think will happen, and I'll do the same, and then we'll collaborate together and kind of see where we mesh. So once you set that plan of action, make sure that they're implementing those changes, and that we set a date to follow up. We've set a date, and we've been observing their behaviors so that we can give appropriate feedback to those performance areas that we've addressed. Again, pick a date that is free from potential conflicts and interruptions. Give them advance notice, and allow them to think about their accomplishments in areas where they wish to develop their skills. When you're reviewing and collecting data, look at the job description, look at previous goals and expectations. If you are not their #1 manager or working with them day in and day out, you may need to get some information from other folks, okay, and that's not unusual. And review your personal notes on performance. It's impossible for you to remember everything that employee has done for the last 12 months. So I do encourage you to kind of keep personal notes, or just kind of a list of, good things and bad things throughout the year. Prepare your documentation. Please, please, please complete that evaluation form prior to sitting down in the meeting with that employee. And give specifics on performance, positives and negatives. So if they really botched a project, note that in the evaluation. If they really did outstanding on a couple others, mention that as well. Again, the discussion, positive, friendly note. State the purpose of the meeting, that we're going to review their accomplishments and areas for development. Gain their perspective on what went well and what he or she could have done better. Most of the time, if I've been given feedback as the employee throughout the year, I'm going to be pretty self-aware of what I'm good at and what I'm not, and I should be forthcoming with that. Provide your appraisal of their performance, their accomplishments, and areas of development, and give constructive feedbacks that need more work, and how both of you all are going to work together to do that. And summarize that joint view of performance, highlighting both views of accomplishments and development areas, and kind of just close, wrap up after you do your development action plan, new standards, new goals, new expectations, how they're going to meet them, what their personal improvement may be. Maybe they're going to take courses outside of the organization to develop their skill set. So identify, it's really important, identify your key actions that they, as the employee, will take, but also you as the supervisor. Kind of wrap up the meeting. Always the important question, addressing pay. Obviously, there's always only so much piece of the pie in terms of budget. So if it's tied to compensation, the performance piece of it is, which hopefully it should be, you may want to discuss that. Or if it's something that, you need to think about and look at what we can do, then, set up a time to review that after you have a number in mind. Ask for and listen to the employees' views and inputs and address any concerns that may have when they're giving you their feedback. And then you want to close the discussion with a summary. Summarize those main points, the actions that are going to be taken. And to keep that morale and that motivation high, you always want to kind of reiterate your confidence in them if that's applicable to the situation. Everybody likes a little bit of warm and fuzzy every so often, so try to do that. Your follow-up can be formal or informal, but remember, performance appraisals or disciplinary or whatever it may be is not a one-time-a-year event. It's a day-to-day activity, okay? So that's important. In the evaluation period, again, you want to, a few skill points that I like to identify. Ask for the team members' evaluation and give your evaluation of their performance. Step 2 would be identify what would help or maintain and improve their performance from an organizational standpoint and from their standpoint. Have them identify how improvement can be achieved. And again, lastly, agree on that plan and follow up to measure results. There are a few reasons why evaluations can fail. And I'm going to kind of I'll quickly go through some of these. First and foremost, as a manager, I lack the information concerning an employee's actual performance, whether that be because I haven't been observing them throughout the year, or maybe they just transferred into my department towards the end of the year or mid-year, and I haven't, had an opportunity to see them for a full 12 months. So again, that's why it's important to tap into those other managers if you don't have all of the information you need. If the standards used to evaluate the performance are unclear, we talked about really setting SMART goals and clear performance measurements, so make sure that we've got clear standards. If you as the manager are not taking the appraisal seriously, the employee will not either, and therefore any sort of performance improvement typically won't happen, to be honest, because they know that you're not really going to hold them accountable and you're not taking it seriously. So we don't want that to happen. If you're not prepared for the review with the employee, it could hinder the process, as well as if you are not honest or sincere during the evaluation. Again, don't oversell it, don't lowball it, be honest and forthright. Doing performance management and evaluation is a work in progress. No manager ever woke up one day and said, hey, I'm really great at this. It takes practice. So work on your feedback skills. If they're not getting that ongoing continuous performance feedback, that can be a challenge. If we don't have sufficient resources to reward the performance, that can hinder the process. But again, be creative. Get creative in ways that you can reward them. If we can't give them a bump in pay, can we give them a day or two extra of, vacation or sick time or what have you? Look at creative ways. And if you as the manager are using unclear or ambiguous language in the evaluation process, it can make it confusing for the employee. So make sure you're using layman's terms. Performance appraisal really is a form of measurement, not only for the people, what our people do, looking at their skill and their quality and quantity, but also measuring the results, the performance, the improvement of old skills, did I develop new skills, and how much productivity I'm really engaging in. Okay. It also allows us to develop those job skills. Tap into what they're doing well, but also where can they grow? What new skill set can I learn? Can I develop as a person, building myself, my interpersonal skills? And can I look at that next position, that career pathing that I mentioned at the beginning of our session today? This is an ongoing process, and it really can help in defining careers for a number of people. So with that said, I know I just threw a lot of information at you in a short amount of time. I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy to see if we have any questions that I can answer.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. We do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is regarding job descriptions. The question
Sure.
is how much detail should be included in a job description?
Sure, that's a great question. I personally, from an HR perspective, prefer what we call criteria-based job descriptions. And it's a combination of the performance evaluation and the job description in an all-in-one tool. And they're quantitative and they're qualitative. So I think, without knowing what specific position they're referring to, I think you try to get as specific as possible and detailed as possible without boxing them in 100%. If they're responsible for X amount of processing per week, you want to outline that. If they're responsible for getting, monthly or quarterly department reports to you, you want to outline that. If they're responsible for filing or, maintaining contacts or whatnot. The more detail in my mind from an HR perspective, the better. And certainly I am happy to send whomever asks the question samples of job descriptions that they can kind of look at, and we can talk about that further if they want to give me a call and kind of walk through, some additional feedback on that.
Okay. And then one other question, this is a good one. As an employee, how would you recommend approaching your manager if you feel you have not received a fair appraisal?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that's kind of twofold. One, if you feel comfortable and you have a good relationship with your manager. All too often, and it's unfortunate, but it does unfortunately happen, employees don't have good relationships with their managers, so they feel intimidated going to them with that information. I think the best advice that I would have is to be respectful and to be honest and forthright and say, so-and-so, we went through this process, and I truly value your feedback, but I also feel like there are some areas that may not have been representative or fair. And I was wondering if we could sit down and talk through some of those areas that I feel, were a little different than my opinion. Because quite honestly, as a manager myself, sometimes I forget all of the good things that people do. Or sometimes, I forget, some of the bad things that people do. And, I may rate somebody lower than what they would rate themselves, and that's why I think it's really nice to do those self-evaluations, because I always give my staff the opportunity, if there's a difference in ratings, I say, all right, I'm totally open to changing or possibly changing my rating. Describe to me why you feel like you deserved a higher number in that aspect, or in this position or job duty. So I definitely think, just go to them, be honest, be respectful, and just ask that you all revisit it. Of course, if it is a situation where you don't have a good relationship or you don't feel like you can do that and you truly feel that it was unfair, I would encourage you to follow chain of command and in accordance with your policy and procedure at the company. And normally that's down in the employee handbook if you have one. You don't want to, jump or step on too many people's toes, because obviously you have to continue working there, but you want to make sure that, you're trying to get a fair evaluation. So that's a great question.
Okay, and that's all the questions that we have. We've got a couple more comments that people would like some samples of some job descriptions. So
sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
yeah, I can do
okay, well, that's all we have. Jamie, if you got anything else.
No, I just, first and foremost, thank you all so much for taking, again, time out of your busy day. Kathy, thank you so much for coordinating this session. We certainly always appreciate the opportunity. If any of the participants, need anything, feel free to call me at CESCO. My number is 804-931-6281. I'd be happy to help. Or if you want to email me, it's Jamie, Jamie, at CESCO, S as in Sam, E, S as in Sam, C-O, M as in Mary, GT.com. and we'll take care of you. And we'll definitely get some samples. If you want samples, email me or call me, or I can coordinate with Kathy and we'll get some samples sent out to everybody. But otherwise, thank you all so much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day.
All right, thank you, Jamie, and I will send out your contact information to all attendees.
Perfect.
And we appreciate you taking the time to attend this presentation today. Your opinion counts in everything we do, and we would appreciate your feedback. I will be sending out a link to the recording to view the playback of today's webinar, and along with a brief evaluation for you to complete. So if there are no further questions or comments, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for participating.